The floorboards are not creaking, but the air in your bedroom has suddenly grown heavy, pressing against your chest with the weight of a physical presence. You wake not to a sound, but to a sudden clarity of mind that feels entirely misplaced in the dead of night. Your eyes dart to the bedside clock, the digital numbers glowing a harsh neon crimson. 3:03 a.m. In this suspended moment, the shadows in the corner of the ceiling seem to have deepened, curdling into shapes that your mind struggles to categorize. And the silence is so absolute it feels like a roar in your ears. You are paralyzed by the irrational but unshakable conviction that something has been watching you sleep. And now that you are awake, it is merely waiting for you to notice it. This specific window of time, stretching from the stroke of 3 until the first gray hints of dawn, has long been whispered about as the witching hour, or more ominously, the devil's hour. It is a period where the boundary between the mundane and the monstrous is said to grow porous, allowing the things that dwell in the periphery of human perception to slip through the cracks. While modern skeptics might dismiss this as mere superstition, the dread associated with 3 a.m. is a cross-cultural phenomenon that predates our electric lights and digital alarms. It is a time when the world feels fundamentally altered, stripped of its daytime logic and replaced by a predatory stillness that has haunted the collective psyche for centuries. The sensation of being watched during these early hours is more than just a trick of the light. It is a physiological reality that roots itself in the very chemistry of our survival. At approximately 3 a.m, the human body reaches its lowest point in the circadian cycle, a biological valley where core temperature drops and the brain's production of melatonin is at its absolute peak. During this window, our cognitive functions are dampened and our emotional responses become heightened, creating a perfect internal environment for the seeds of paranoia to germinate. Scientists have noted that this is when the part of the brain responsible for logical reasoning is at its least active, leaving the brain's center of fear and survival to interpret the world unchecked. This biological vulnerability serves as a fragile bridge into a much older terror. Religious scholars and historians have long pointed toward a specific inversion as the source of the hour's notoriety, suggesting that the 3 o'clock window was adopted by the occult as a deliberate mockery of the Christian tradition. Because the New Testament records the death of Christ as occurring at 3 in the afternoon, the opposite hour of 3 in the morning became synonymous with demonic activity. A perverse mirror image intended to insult the Holy Trinity. This historical perspective argues that the darkness of 3 a.m. is not merely a lack of light, but a deliberate void where the influence of the divine is at its weakest. Records from the 16th century, particularly during the height of the Great European Witch Hunt, show that the hours after midnight were viewed with a profound legal and spiritual gravity. It was believed that during this time, the veil between worlds was thinnest, not because of a change in geography, but because the human world was at its most dormant. This period of inactivity among the living was thought to provide a vacuum that more malevolent entities were all too eager to fill, turning the quiet of the countryside into a theater for the unseen. As the pre-industrial world gave way to the age of coal and iron, the nature of this dread shifted, but never truly dissipated. Before the widespread adoption of the light bulb, human sleep was not the continuous 8-hour block we strive for today, but was instead split into segmented sleep. Historical journals and medical texts from the 17th and 18th centuries describe a first sleep, followed by an hour or two of wakefulness known as the watch, before returning to a second sleep. This middle period of wakefulness often occurred around 3 in the morning. For those living in the flickering glow of a dying hearth, the watch was a time of deep reflection, prayer, or intense anxiety. As they sat in the darkness, listening to the settling of their homes and the strange cries of the nocturnal world outside. The transition from historical lore to modern horror often finds its anchor in the documented tragedies that seem to congregate around this specific timestamp. Perhaps the most infamous case tied to the 3 a.m. phenomenon is the 1974 DeFeo murders in Amityville, New York. On the night of November 13th, Ronald DeFeo Jr. systematically moved through his family home with a high-powered rifle, taking the lives of his parents and 4 siblings. While the subsequent Amityville horror hauntings have been the subject of intense debate and accusations of fabrication, the chilling fact remains. The coroner's reports suggested the murders occurred in the early morning hours, with many accounts settling on approximately 3:15 a.m. The haunting image of a house where everyone died in their sleep, unaware and silent, has fueled the belief that this hour is a magnet for a specific kind of methodical violence. This association with tragedy isn't limited to the sensationalized world of paranormal investigations. In the sterile corridors of hospitals and care facilities, the 3 o'clock hour carries a weight that medical professionals often discuss in hushed tones. Statistical data regarding hospital mortality rates has occasionally shown a spike in deaths during the pre-dawn hours. While skeptics correctly point to the body's weakened state and the lowest point of the circadian rhythm as the primary cause, the nursing lore persists. There is a common sentiment among graveyard shift workers that the air in the wards changes at 3 a.m. It becomes thinner, colder, and the machines seem to hum with a more ominous frequency as patients often slip away in that quietest moment of the night. If the biology explains the feeling and the history explains the fear, then the psychological phenomenon of sleep paralysis provides the terrifying imagery. Thousands of people across different cultures and eras have reported waking up at 3 a.m. to find themselves pinned to their beds, unable to move or scream while a dark figure lurks in the corner or sits upon their chest. Known in folklore as the old hag or the shadow person, this experience is now understood by neurologists as a glitch in the transition between REM sleep and wakefulness. Your brain wakes up, but your body remains in a state of muscular atonia to prevent you from acting out your dreams. In this half-woken state, the brain often hallucinates a predatory presence to explain why the body cannot move, effectively turning a neurochemical error into a visceral nightmare. Yet, even with a scientific explanation in hand, the fracture line in the theory remains. Why do so many people across continents and centuries see the same types of figures? The consistency of these visions, the tall man in the wide-brimmed hat, the crouched figure with glowing eyes, the weeping woman, suggest that the human mind has a pre-programmed horror template that is activated specifically at 3 in the morning. It raises the unsettling question of whether these hallucinations are truly just internal malfunctions, or if the biological dip in our defenses simply makes us more sensitive to something that is always there, lurking just outside the frequency of our daytime consciousness. But if it isn't a ghost, and it isn't just biology, then perhaps it is the time itself. The fear of 3 a.m. is also deeply tied to the concept of the liminal space. It is too late to be considered evening and too early to be considered morning. It is a time that belongs to no one. A chronological no man's land where the rules of the day have expired and the rules of the dawn have yet to be written. In this void, the human imagination is forced to confront the silence. And in that silence, we begin to hear the things we spend our daylight hours ignoring. The house settling, the wind rattling a loose pane, or perhaps the rhythmic breathing of someone who isn't supposed to be in the room. Consider the accounts of those who have experimented with the 3 a.m. challenge, a trend that saw people attempting rituals or occult practices specifically at this hour. While most of these are easily dismissed as internet theatrics, the underlying psychological effect on the participants is real. By focusing their attention on this specific window, they induce a state of hypervigilance. Every sound is magnified, every shadow is scrutinized, and the brain begins to pattern match mundane stimuli into terrifying anomalies. In the legal world, some investigators have noted a peculiar pattern in the timing of certain crimes and disappearances, often referred to as the dead zone of the night. It is the time when the streets are at their emptiest and witnesses are at their fewest. The darkness is at its most profound, providing a shroud for activities that cannot bear the light of day. This practical reality of the hour feeds back into the lore, reinforcing the idea that if something terrible is going to happen, it will happen when the rest of the world is lost in the depths of their sleep. As you lie there in the dark, the minutes on the clock finally ticking toward 3:15, you might try to convince yourself that the cold draft on your neck is just the air conditioning or a poorly sealed window. You might tell yourself that the rhythmic thumping you hear is just your own heartbeat, amplified by the silence of the house. The digital display on your clock flickers, the red light casting distorted shadows across the floor. You realize that you are holding your breath, listening for a sound that you hope you never actually hear. Is it the wind? Or is it a footfall on the carpet? Is it the house settling, or is it the door handle slowly turning? The logic of the sun is hours away, and for now, you are a guest in a world that belongs to the shadows. You close your eyes, but the image of the clock remains burned into your retinas, a glowing reminder that the hour is far from over. And as you finally begin to slip back toward the edge of sleep, you can't help but wonder why the air in the room suddenly feels just a little bit colder than it did a moment ago.